Welcome everyone again. Thank you for joining us today to talk about hybrid work. Before we get started, we are going to be recording today's webinar just to be able to share with people who couldn't join us today and also to send out to all of you who are with us as well. So let's see here. Maddie, are you going to start us off here on
We are recording. We're all set.
Recording. Well, thank you. Awesome. Well, perfect. Always one step ahead of me. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and get started with introductions then. So I'll kick us off. I am Rebecca Martin. I am the SVP of Culture and Talent at Beehive. I'm actually celebrating, this is a fun week for me because I'm celebrating my 18th anniversary at Beehive this week. And also 24 years in the Twin Cities PR market. So feeling pretty excited about that. Thank you for the congratulations, Lisa. So my role at Beehive really does center on people and culture and purpose. So today's topic is something that I have been thinking about, reading about, talking about with peers, with Abigail, with lots of people. Of course, you can't go anywhere right now and not talk about where are you working, how many days you're going in. Everyone's talking about it. So I am super happy to be in community with all of you today and appreciate you joining this. Abigail?
Awesome. Rebecca is also selling herself short because she leads really all of our hybrid work environment, culture, and engagement efforts at Beehive for our team. And so I think that's what really is such a great skill set that Rebecca brings to our team every day, and something I certainly appreciate about working with her. So thanks again for joining us. My name is Abigail Greenhack. I am a group senior vice president at Beehive. I work a lot with our client organizations across everything that Beehive does. And so if you're not familiar with our agency, we are a strategic communication agency. Some of the pillars of work that we focus in on is crisis management, change management, everything internal culture and engagement with our client organizations too. And we work really in a wide variety of industries too. And what I think is interesting about this topic today is that it really is at the intersection of all of the different work that we do, from change management to crisis communication sometimes to that culture and engagement piece. And so we're hearing about this topic of hybrid work across every industry we work in, as well as different levels within organizations, which I think is really reflective of the registrations that we saw come in for this. Everybody from marketers to communicators to the C-suite of organizations to HR leaders. Everybody has kind of a different perspective on hybrid work that we think is really interesting and certainly reflective in the group of people that we attracted for today's webinar. So we're excited to talk about that today, what we are seeing both from across the industry kind of broadly, as well as with our client organizations around what's working and where we're seeing some big challenges. So Rebecca will share how today will go, and we'll just dive right into the content.
Absolutely. So we're going to just kick things off and share just kind of a big picture perspective briefly on just kind of just a big picture view on kind of the state of hybrid culture and as kind of through our perspective. And then try to really summarize through this framework of what's working, what's not, trying to summarize some of the key points that we, again, are reading about, hearing from clients, peer organizations. I'm part of a public relations council HR community that meets bi-monthly. So there's just all these input points that I think kind of between my role and Abigail's role, all these things coming together that we really wanted to summarize into some of these key points. You can submit your questions in chat as we go. And also if we may pose some questions as we go. You can always use the I think we have the raise hand function on here. Yes. So you can also do that as well. If you want to chime in and share, there's a wealth of knowledge also in our participants too. So we may ask you to chime in, so you can raise your hand on that. So let's just jump into it. I know our time's going to go fast actually, because we probably have about 40 minutes really to talk about this content. So perfect. Let's get moving. All right. Okay, so I think we all agree and are all, I'm sure we're all in the same meeting. The future of work is definitely hybrid, right? The way we work, the way we all work has fundamentally changed, right, in the last 3 years. And really, there's no going backwards. We are not going back to the pre-pandemic. We're not coming back 5 days a week, 8:30 to 5 in the office. And really that everything you're seeing, we've really kind of evened out where hybrid is going to be kind of that new reality. It's kind of that future. I know I was just looking at this new Gallup survey that came out, and the stats there are really showing that only 20% of people who are able to work, remotely, are working entirely on site. 52% are hybrid, and 29 are still fully remote. So the stats have, while they fluctuated a little bit, they really kind of leveled out in the last year or so. And that's really very telling from where we're at, just from a kind of macro perspective. People now have this level of schedule flexibility. People love the ability to have that schedule flexibility, to work from home, to be able to dash out and do things, to not have the cost of the commute, to have that time saved. But we're all really, people are really missing and craving those connections that you get when you're in person. Mm-hmm. And also, I think the development opportunities, the professional development and mentoring opportunities that happen when you're in person, I think that's something especially that we're hearing from our younger talent and new employees who are just beginning with organizations. Really that mentoring, that onboarding, that learning that happens when you're in the same physical environment, that's something that people are really missing. And so that's kind of that balance, right? And why hybrid really seems to be coming in to be the future of where we're going. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Something that Beehive has talked about for a long time as related to our purpose, mission, and values work is this idea that expectations are rising. Employees want to work for organizations who believe what they believe in, or at least have some degree of alignment there. And now we're really seeing that the buck has stopped and expectations have risen and they're not going backwards, like Rebecca noted. Employees now expect that high level of flexibility and autonomy from their employer. And frankly, they're going to leave if they don't get that, regardless of even pay or the company that they're working for. If they're not getting that level of flexibility, they will find an option that works better for them and their personal lives, frankly. And so seeing organizations step into those conversations willingly is kind of best case scenario, but we're certainly seeing organizations that aren't there yet and making some choices that don't necessarily align with what employees are looking for and seeking and frankly demanding in this job market. We're seeing lots of headlines of telling us companies are calling workers back. We're seeing kind of a rise in that even post-COVID. We certainly saw a first wave of that, but it's certainly continuing. But when you start to read down into some of that content, nobody seems to be, at least from the large employer standpoint, forcing people back Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. There still certainly is a level of flexibility there to say, we're aiming for 2 to 3 days a week. This is what we're trying to get out of those time and that collaboration information pieces together. But we're certainly seeing a varying degree of success in that. I mean, calling people back in to simply have, frankly, a butt in a seat is not going to get that hybrid work culture in a productive way, or at least as productive as possible. So just some interesting headlines there. And really what seems to be at stake and the sticking point in this conversation is this question and this kind of mystery around who's controlling these decisions, who's setting the policy, who's enforcing them, is anybody enforcing them, and what does that information all tell us, and how those decisions are being made and communicated is of utmost importance there. And so that really leads us to the bottom line of doing hybrid work well isn't simple. It's not simply having an office space and a home office. It really requires some effort and some intentionality behind making that hybrid work culture work for everybody. The organization, its leaders, team members from across different disciplines and different groups. It really requires some thought and some intentionality, and that's what we'll talk through, what's working and what's not today.
Okay.
Perfect. So first, kind of dovetailing off of those policies in particular, what we're seeing that's working. And again, this is looking at macro trends with the conversation very broadly, as well as what we're hearing from our client organizations and for Beehive as an organization too. We are certainly a hybrid work environment here at our organization. So on the what's working side, transparent data-driven decisions based on internal and external qual and quant data. We want to see those decisions being made from sometimes the C-suite is where those decisions are ultimately made. We want to make sure that those decisions are really based in data and not simply a gut instinct of trying to go back to the way things were pre-pandemic of people being in office Monday through Friday. People are seeing success when that is based on good data that people can feel strongly about and can support, because it is difficult to argue with good data. And alongside that, workplaces that listen, workplaces are doing it well when they're taking the time to get input and feedback along the way. And making sure that that isn't just a one-time input session, that really is a feedback loop that's revisited perhaps on a quarterly basis to say what's working in the hybrid work culture right now, what's not working, and then using that data to adjust where needed. And I think gone are the days where a decision is made and that policy is enforced for forevermore. We need to really be flexible and be willing to adjust as needed as we learn things, as teams change, as responsibilities shift. Having that willingness to adjust along the way and that capacity to do so is certainly important. And then on the what's not working from a policy standpoint, just addressing the elephant in the room sometimes, policies designed for the comfort of the C-suite aren't going to work. They will result in pushback. They will result in people leaving organizations if they feel like a policy is simply designed because a certain set of leaders is really more comfortable having butts in seats 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. Unclear expectations and inequitable enforcement, making sure that expectations are set up front for what a policy looks like and why, and then making sure that there is some level of enforcement to make sure that people are doing what's expected. It can help kind of mitigate issues down the road with somebody not meeting those expectations that perhaps were never outwardly communicated. What's not working, certainly we've all seen the stories of forging ahead with return to office policies that employees push back on. I think that pushback can be in varying degrees. It can be coffee table conversation or text messages on the side with your coworkers, all the way to, big organized walkouts, or just frankly, people just refusing to follow policy and making headlines as such. So certainly different degrees in what that looks like depending on the organization. And then, of course, policies with no employee input on the onset. That just naturally creates tension, challenges, burnout, resentment, and ultimately turnover. And I think that turnover number is something to really consider for an organization, because there's oftentimes very tangible financial implications of turnover. Oftentimes organizations can quantify what it costs to recruit, to fill, to train, to mentor for any given role that turns over at any given time. So I think that turnover data point is an important one to keep an eye on at organizations, because that can be a barometer to be getting some good insights on what's working and what's not in hybrid work.
I was just thinking about one of the questions that did come in was someone asking for examples of companies who are doing hybrid really well. And when I'm thinking about workplaces that listen and that ask for employee feedback, Spotify is a company that I think when we're looking for big examples that we can kind of point to, Spotify is a company I think that's doing it really, really well. They came out early on with a work from anywhere policy, which is a little different from talking about a hybrid policy. But what they did was come out with their policy really early on. And then they have a whole initiative where they're asking for continual feedback from their employees. They came out not maybe a year and a half later with an update to their policy, and they have a whole channel that is even externally facing that gives updates on what kind of information they're getting from their employees, what they're hearing, how they're implementing that feedback into their policy. And so that's something that I would definitely recommend taking a look at, even though it's work from anywhere, not hybrid. The way they're doing it and the strategy behind the way they're listening to employees and implementing that feedback is spot on.
Nice.
Anything else here in the okay.
So.
All right. What else? What else do we have? Okay. So work schedules. This is a big one. Okay. So hybrid work schedules. So what's working? This is definitely a challenging one. So I'm going to start with what's not working. I'm going to go opposite of what I usually do. I like to start with positive. But what's not working? I think what we're seeing not working most is this real strict one-size-fits-all mandated approach. I think that's what you're getting the most pushback on. Mm-hmm. I think those are really the companies that are just kind of saying, this is what's best. This is what's going to be best for the company. They're not doing what you talked about, which is getting the input from employees. And they're just kind of coming out with this, here's a policy that we're just going to implement across all of our, multiple locations across country. And this is just kind of how it is. That seems to be what I'm hearing is getting the most pushback. It's not taking, and that's not taking into account geographic differences with the way commutes work. It's not, so big things it's not taking into account. It's not taking into account differences in, the way different departments work. So you have examples where people are commuting into an office 3 days a week just to sit in an office and not interact with anyone, because the kind of work that they do isn't really work that has a lot of collaboration. So it just doesn't make sense. So I think what is working is when you have these real customized hybrid work schedules where you really give more autonomy to the managers and leaders to work more with their, is it their department? Is it a small team where maybe they're given the autonomy and the ownership to say, here's a general framework that we're looking to accomplish. We want to generally have people in 3 days a week or whatever you decide from a kind of overarching perspective. Now you can work with that team to figure out within these general parameters, what's going to make the most sense.
Mhm.
And maybe, you know, it's not 3, whatever it is. But then you really let those managers figure out what makes the most sense for that team in a way that people feel heard and it takes into account the kind of work they're doing.
Yeah.
I think that's what's really doing. That's what's really working well. So we did have a question come in ahead of time. People asked, is mandating time in the office working? Or is it really creating a sense of this micromanagement and mistrust? And I think definitely the mandates, from everything I'm hearing from peers across the industry and things I'm reading, I really don't think it's working. I think there's also just not a lot of compliance with it. And that gets really tricky because then you have these mandates and you have some people who are complying, but you have other people who aren't. So then you kind of create this sense of like, well, I'm coming in, but these other people aren't coming in, but they don't have consequences. So do we have to come in? And then that gets really kind of muddy, right? And that kind of all flies in the face of what we're seeing from a data perspective, which is that 90% of employees expect flexibility from their employers. So then you're also having these feelings of like, you don't trust me. This is not, this isn't right. So I think, let your data kind of be your guide here. Again, kind of back to some data. Talk to employees and figure out how you can really do a little more customization with that, with the way we put that schedule and policy together.
I think something Rebecca has done really well at Beehive for our team is this idea of flexibility within a framework. So an example of how that comes to life for our organization is simply the hours that we are working. We work in client service, thus we need to be available, of course, for our clients during regular business hours. But that idea of regular business hours is no longer uniform, both for our organization as well as many others. And so at Beehive, we can kind of choose the hours that work best for us, anywhere within the framework of about 7:30 in the morning till 5:30 in the evening, to find that block of time that works best for your both productivity, some people are morning people and some people are not, as well as your personal life. So for me, that looks like regular business hours of 8 a.m. to 4:30 so that I can meet my daughter at the bus stop at 4:30 and kind of have that 30 minutes of time with her before kind of the chaos of the evening takes over. And so for me, that has been such a benefit of hybrid work and just that flexibility within a framework so that I'm meeting client needs and the work that I need to get done, but I'm still able to prioritize being a mom and being available for my family when it matters most. A good example of that flexibility. So diving deeper into just that kind of value proposition of what's working and what's not, as far as communicating what in-office work looks like. Really, what's working is explaining why in-office work is important for every employee. And that kind of seems like well, of course we should be doing that. But we're seeing with this idea of mandates, you're not really telling the story of why that's important. So for each employee, especially newer employees in the workforce, they want to learn. They want to be there to listen and to collaborate and talk to people. We see that from our youngest and our most junior team members, that they actually were first to raise their hand, during the pandemic to say, I miss seeing everybody and being in an office to just talk through problems more anecdotally than having to send a formal email or make sure my verbiage is exactly correct in email or chat. To be able to have those conversations is really important from a learning and talent development standpoint. and looking at clear expectations of why it's beneficial for both the people and the business. So from a business perspective, making sure that there are those moments of collaboration and discussion that just are going to naturally happen better and more organically in person compared to virtually or in a Teams meeting. Beehive has quarterly meetings where we go over state of the business and important updates from client organizations. And those meetings are opportunities that do draw people into the office because it's good moments of collaboration and getting together. And while it's certainly not mandated that everybody's here in person, it's one of those opportunities that really draws us in. And then looking at what's not working, and anytime organizations are making return to office messaging all about the company and why it's good for the business, that really needs to be in balance with the personal benefits to coming into an office space. And it simply can't be about real estate investment or square footage to use or anything like that. That's solely focused on the business. Definitely needs to have a balance there.
Okay, so talking about kind of under the heading of performance, I think what's working here is just taking kind of a new look at performance management and trying to adapt it to new ways of working, and providing a little more training to managers because the way we are working is different now, right? Manager's role has really changed. And the level of we know that the level of connection that we need managers to make now is, it's much greater. The need to connect more frequently it's an absolute necessity. And so there's some new skills and some upskilling and training that we need for managers to do now and supervisors to do now. And I think what isn't working, and I think what you hear a lot about, is this sense of being overly focused on productivity in a way that people don't feel trusted. So this kind of looks like, kind of to the second point here, using this idea of FaceTime as a performance management tool, where people feel like if they're working from home, there's a sense that they're kind of being watched for an active status, or I need to make sure my light is on so people know that I'm really working. It's this sense of it's sort of the offline or the at-home version of sitting in your chair. It's the butts and seats at home, right? So it creates a little bit of this performative productivity instead of really looking at what people are, instead of actually looking at what people are doing and what they need for development and growth, and really having those actual conversations about the kind of work they're doing, what kind of growth and development, those real connections. It's really kind of sticking at that surface level of feeling like someone's kind of watching you and not trusting you, and they're just kind of assuming that you're not getting your work done because they can't see you, right? And that just creates a lot of resentment, mistrust, and it's just not working well. So I think that's where you flip to the other side and just look at, let's create those connections through new ways of managers connecting with people. And I think that is working a lot better. Let's see here.
Let's talk about office space. Beehive, we were very fortunate throughout the pandemic to be able to shift fully remote, let go of our office lease, and rebuild a space post-pandemic to these new ways of working and how we wanted to move forward as an office space. And of course, that not every organization is going to be as fortunate as we happen to be, where you can reinvent what your physical space looks like just based on this hybrid work culture. But I think there are some ways to be flexible and to think about how to use your space to really maximize time in office so that it is productive and a positive experience for everybody. So certainly what's not working is some of that dated and private office structure. You know, if you're coming to the office to simply be in a room with a door and on your computer on virtual calls all day, that's not exactly productive or a good use of the commute time, right? If you don't have that time to actually connect with people and to collaborate. And we're also seeing, you know, you do need those private spaces in order to have some of those virtual conversations or private conversations, but we're definitely seeing a shift away from private office structure, kind of generally speaking. But then on the flip side, what is working, making the office a magnet for connections and collaboration. We're actually seeing coworkers are now considered a top amenity. And honestly, coworkers are what drives me to the office on a regular basis. I'm typically here 2 to 3 days a week because I want to have those personal connections with people outside of my immediate family. I want to be able to get out of the house and have other conversations. And Rebecca's my go-to for many parenting advice conversations that I'm not going to Slack her or send her an instant message about my daughter's earrings, but I will have that conversation over coffee or lunch with her because she's been through the same experience that I have with her daughter. And so really seeing coworkers and that collaboration as an amenity is kind of a different way to think about it that can be positive and beneficial. What is also working, offering reasons to come in. Free lunches, food, of course, is still a top priority always. And it's not necessarily that the food is free, but it's really that food and bringing people together over a meal is just always culturally a moment to connect and a reason to connect that people can all really gather around. We do that on Tuesdays at Beehive. We have each person has a budget if they volunteer to be the chef, and they make a soup for everybody. And it really is a magnetizer for people to want to come in because they know we probably will have a quorum because we happen to work with a lot of good chefs. And we've also seen it at some of our client organizations, bringing people together over a waffle bar at North Memorial has been a great way to bring departments together, teams together to make up some waffles and to keep the fixings on hand to have a good connection point and draw people in. Revamping office structure is also seeing and taking that investment to do that where possible is certainly important. Making sure that we have that space for collaboration and that you are upgrading technology where needed to ensure that seamless experience for in-office and remote employees. We're fortunate here where we have our dedicated spaces that all have the AV technology where you simply plug in and you can have both a hybrid meeting or simply a one-on-one virtual meeting, kind of depending on what's needed in that moment. So sometimes that does require an investment, and know that that can be a hard sell internally, but it really does go a long way to making sure that that hybrid work culture is a seamless experience for everybody. I think we've all experienced the times where you try to plug in and you have to push 10 million different buttons and call IT to try to get a meeting to work. And it's just simply not worth the effort. And then you shy away from coming into the office because the technology just isn't as seamless as perhaps it should be. One of the questions that came in is what is drawing employees back to the office? So we've touched on a handful of people. I do think that collaboration is super important. And now it's becoming a treat to have those in-office meetings, whether that just be with your colleagues, but it can also be with partner organizations or different departments where there's opportunities to meet and connect over solving a problem or working on a particular project together. We also like to host clients too, to have those conversations that sure we could have via Teams and it would be fine and productive, but it also is so nice to be able to have the in-person connections to really focus in, you have minimal distractions, and you can really tackle a particular issue over a period of time in person. And taking the time to do that is super important.
Okay. Last one. I think we've kind of addressed this as we've gone. Actually, it's just the hours. what's working is giving people flexibility about on-site hours. Just people are used to having more flexibility on how to manage their lives and their work. And so making sure there's less rigidity about that schedule, I think honors that and meets people where they're at. And it just reflects the fact that how we work has fundamentally changed in the last 3 years. I also think this was a big aha for us was you don't have to come in for the whole day. We had that moment where we're like, oh, we can come in. Some days we'll just come in and take a in-person meeting, maybe have some collaboration time, and then head home at 2:00 and then have some heads down work time at home in the afternoon. And so I think just keeping an open mindset and flexible mindset about how that works as well, I think is really working.
Yeah.
So just lastly, we popped up a couple of the other questions that came in advance of today's session, and we'll just dive into these.
Yeah.
And if you have anything else that you is on your mind as we're going, you can add that to the chat as well.
Perfect. I'll start with some client examples of virtual engagement events to help keep staff engaged. So certainly we're familiar with the traditional town halls and all staff meetings, and those are important, but it can also happen in smaller ways and kind of team-to-team based ways as well, and role-to-role ways as well. So we're seeing the use of virtual office hours, people like the CEO or the CHRO having open office hours on Teams where they might just be, or whatever virtual platform you're working on. There's just an open link to join and have a cup of coffee with the senior leaders, or to ask them questions or hear their input on particular topic areas. Having kind of that set time frame and that access to senior leaders is definitely seeing some good effectiveness there. We're also seeing just different ways of using chat programs, whether it be Slack or Yammer or Teams, setting up different channels to address different topic areas. So it could be everything from, competitor analysis. What are you seeing from different competitors that you think is interesting and everybody should be aware of, to even personal things like, recipe sharing or retail therapy is a big one on our team, to be sharing, deals and coupons that come through and prep for holiday season. So it can really have a variety of different topics kind of based on the interest and the type of work that you do. And that type of regular interaction online can help kind of just spark natural conversations, either one-on-one or when you are in the office. But really maximizing the use of some of those virtual chat tools is really important, and continually evolving them so it stays fresh and doesn't get stale over time. We're also seeing some really strong virtual lunch and learns every couple of weeks from client organizations, to be able to tackle a particular topic area about the work that they do and say, this is how we approached it, this was the result, be able to discuss it. And it doesn't need to be anything super formal, but simply having that sort of lunch and learn where people might even just bring their own lunch and sit around and talk about a particular topic, or lunch could certainly be brought in. That's always a draw. Those types of casual learning opportunities are also seeing some good success. A regular recognition and appreciation. We're used to seeing some of those larger award programs, some of the formal award programs at client organizations, but we're also seeing some good success in more in the moment recognition and appreciation, whether that be just a $5 gift card because of a particular project that went really well, or, we do little note cards that we submit and then we kind of take turns reading them out to each other. Just sort of those small moments of gratitude and recognition can go a long way. What else? Let's see. Employee resource group activities. This was a good question here down in red that came in that I wanted to touch on too. And I think using employee data is an important one for this one. The question, the person who submitted this noted that they want more programming, but there aren't very many volunteers to suggest and create these programs or even participate them when they are being built. So I think building that ERG engagement is really important to start with setting a good expectation and level setting on what's possible. How much time are people willing to invest in this topic on a quarterly basis? You know, we could be assuming that people want to invest multiple hours when really, you know, maybe 1 hour a quarter is all they can really invest. And I think the use of the word volunteer in that question is interesting too, because frankly, if we're asking people to volunteer, we're asking them to do things on top of their job responsibilities that may just be too much of an ask. So thinking about, is there a particular role within an organization to help lead the strategy on ERG engagement, and then ask for participants to come in and do a book club on a particular topic, or kind of listen to the organization of what the topics are most important and have somebody really assigned to helping lead that work. Might be another way to look at it if the hunger and the desire is there, but people simply aren't willing to put another thing on their list and on their to-do list to help organize it.
Someone as part of their job function.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That's an important consideration there.
I'm thinking there's something part of that question too. So they're saying the remote and hybrid work has taken a toll on the employee resource group activities. I think a lot of that, I think part of that in that question is that I think people overall have looked at their lives and kind of reconsidered how much it's just been sort of a time of reflection in general of for each of us, of where am I spending my time? How much time? It's just been a time of reflection, and maybe that's part of it too. So I think your point is really well taken about investing some of the company's resources and having someone who's paid to do this with some volunteer activities, and to look at what are the expectations and kind of realign those to what's possible.
Yep.
So one of the questions I had been thinking about was this one about any tips for ensuring accountability in working from home when other team members are at the office. So this one I was thinking about for a while, because I think maybe what is behind this is, and maybe the assumption is wrong, but it feels like maybe there's an assumption that people who are maybe working from home maybe aren't as accountable, or maybe there's a challenge with accountability there. To me, this comes really down, I think, to communication and setting really clear expectations. So I would just really ask, the questions I would ask would be, you know, do the employees who are working from home when other people are in the office, has there been clear expectations set for them around, you know, what hours they should be available for meetings, questions, for people to kind of pop in and ask them to collaborate on something. I'd be curious, how are you actually measuring that accountability or that productivity? Do they know, you know, do they know that there's a challenge? And if we do really have a performance issue, you know, if there's something, you know, is that being communicated? If there's an actual, you know, performance issue, if the accountability really isn't there. I think I honestly think it comes down to trust. And I think, to me, it seems like there's probably a real issue there in trust, and maybe needing to rebuild some trust and just set some really clear expectations with each other around what is expected, and get back on the same page.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have anything to add to that one.
Yeah, I think that covers it definitely.
Oh, we've got hands. Hello. See here, I'm gonna click over here.
Hello.
Hi, Adnan.
Hi, how are you? Rebecca.
I
And
am
Madeline, right?
great. What do you
So,
have for us?
I have a question. Is the hybrid work mutual agreement between employee and employer? And the reason why I ask, I came across description as I was reading a job profile, and description from the company. It says we are dedicated to offering a hybrid work environment when applicable. What I can derive from that statement is that sometimes it's not applicable to have a hybrid work environment. And who determines that?
It's a great question and a great point. I think, job posting templates sometimes are just a template where there's some grace period. So for instance, a nurse typically is not going to be applicable for a hybrid role. Typically, I would say. So I think it kind of depends on the role, but I do think employees or potential employees have the ability to say upfront in those job interviews what their expectations are, what they're looking for from a hybrid culture and an office time standpoint. And really, it can be a point of negotiation, I think, in a lot of job interview settings, to make sure that everybody's clear upfront about what those expectations are, where there might be some flexibility and where there isn't flexibility, so that everybody is on the same page really early on in those conversations is going to be super important. And I think from a prospective employee standpoint, honestly, getting that in writing as part of any job offer that you may accept at some point in the future is probably something to consider too, so that you don't find yourself all of a sudden 6 months down the road being expected to come in where that simply wasn't part of the job that you accepted 6 months ago. So I do think there's some power to be had, and that sits with the employee or prospective employee that should be discussed pretty early on.
Is it something that employee brings up, or the employer has a tendency to bring it up during the interview?
Sure. I think if the employer doesn't bring it up, I think the employee should feel empowered to bring it up themselves. I think it just should, regardless of where it comes from originally, or of where it originates, there should be that discussion early on if it's something that is critical to a prospective employee as part of the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Abigail. I don't know how this has happened. We are at time.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining the conversation. We appreciate the questions that were submitted and all the registrants that came through. We really just value the time to spend with you all and share what we've been hearing on this topic. And we'll be sending a follow-up here shortly.
Absolutely. Appreciate everyone's time and attention.
Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
And yes, Brian, we will send a recording.
Yep.
We'll send that out after this.